Anyway, I'm trying to do this Zoom thing. I don't even know if you're there, but this was Bonnie's idea. She said, "You did such a nice job telling your little story at the Den Theater last year. Why don't you try it out on Zoom?" So, I always did like fooling around with the equipment and hi-fi, hooking up speakers and all that. So I'm going to give this a go. So this is my story about the year I read Proust. Now, now, I do like my sweets. I always have. I bake cookies all the time for Card Club and Snappy Seniors. I like chocolate chip the best, and oatmeal raisin, they're good. So it all started because my stomach was growling. It was 4 o'clock, and I said to Bonnie, "Isn't this tea time in England? Let's stop for some coffee or a cookie or something." Because we've been shopping all day, and oh, Bonnie can shop, whether sales and her coupons and 80% off at Kohl's, and she Christmas shops all year round. By Christmas, she's got more for people than she can even remember. So anyway, it's 4 o'clock. It's too early for dinner. Would have been fine by me if we'd stopped by Olive Garden and ate early. But so I said to her, "Why don't we stop at Starbucks?" She said, "But I'm making a pork loin for dinner. We can get some little snack, but I don't want you to spoil your dinner." Now, I can eat. I've always been able to eat, skinny as I am. I've always been able to eat pie or a big dinner. I just can't put weight on, which Bonnie just hates, but there you go. So we stop at Starbucks, and I'm looking for something small, though I could have gone for a big cupcake, but I order a black coffee, and by the register, there's a little cellophane package of a couple of cookies. I didn't take notice of what kind they were, something with kind of ripples or something. And so I said to Bonnie, "So is this small enough? This won't fill me up, not at all." And she says, "Oh, sure, fine." So she has a Tazo herbal tea. She can't have caffeine. She's never said why, but I think it's her bladder. She's too delicate to say so, but I think so anyway. So I get my black coffee and my cookies. Oh, now we were with her son and his wife who were visiting. Billy and Patricia. They order lattes, of course, because they would spend $4 or $5 on coffee, which probably costs Starbucks 50 cents to make. That's fine. That's fine. I like my coffee black, which saves me a lot of money. So anyway, we sit down and I unwrap my cookie and I dip it for a second in the coffee. It's a soft, spongy cookie and it soaks it up right away, almost too mushy. So I don't dip anymore. But I bite into this cookie and I feel better since my stomach was really growling by that time. And Patricia turns to me and says, "Are you having your Madeleine moment?" I said, "What? Are you having your Madeleine moment?" Uh, Now, Patricia is not what you'd call a down home girl. Billy and Patricia are nice enough, sure, usually real quiet, actually. I like Billy. He's okay. But sometimes I think Patricia is a little bit, I don't know, snooty, kind of superior. She don't work and lets her husband support her while she's writing a novel. Now, I can't write a story to save my life, so if she's that creative, God bless her. But it's been 7 years since she quit her job to write, and I don't see her name on any bestseller list or even on any book jacket yet. So I do wonder sometimes what she does all day. Anyway, it was noisy in the Starbucks, and so I'm not sure what she's saying. And so I asked her, "What is my Madeleine moment?" Now, I might have imagined it, But I thought maybe her eyes rolled back a second, like she thought I was kind of stupid. Sometimes I feel that from her. Maybe I'm just imagining it. So she says, "The cookie you're eating is called a Madeleine. There was a French writer named Proust who wrote a book called Remembrance of Things Past." I say, "Oh, yeah, I've heard that title. It's famous. It's a real long book, right?" Again, I think her eyes roll and she says, "Yes, it's a long book. And in the beginning, the main character is having a Madeleine and some tea. He dips the Madeleine into the tea and bites into it. And when he takes the bite, the flavor fills his mouth. Suddenly, his whole childhood and past life come back to him and overwhelm him with memories. And that is the start of the story." And I say, "Well, that's interesting." And I eat my cookie. But I'm wishing I'd gotten the cupcake because I'm still hungry. And she explains, "And so now it's called your Madeleine moment." Like I'm stupid. I got it the first time. But she goes on. "It doesn't have to be a Madeleine, but the idea is something, some flavor in your past. When you eat it, it brings it all back. Your Madeleine." Okay, I get it. So I sip my coffee and I think it over. And it comes to me. And I say to her, "For me, that would be fried cornmeal mush." But I don't even look at her because I know she'd roll her eyes. So, okay, I get it. She says, "That's interesting. Is fried cornmeal mush good?" "It's not good or bad. It's just what you eat," I say. Well, next to me, Bonnie was talking on her cell phone to someone at church about the programs. A couple of people next to us were on their laptops, two people together, facing each other, each with a laptop in front of them. The music was playing over the noise, and up on the wall, there was a mural, a photograph of cornfields in Indiana. And I thought of how different it all was, with cell phones and Wi-Fi and all. And when I bit into my cookie, I felt like what I could taste was that fried cornmeal mush. "You looked a million miles away just then," she said. "Do you like to read? Maybe you should read Proust." Now, she asked me if I liked to read, almost as if she was asking, "Do you know how to read?" I read now and again. Of course, I read my Bible study, and I like books, Robert Parker mysteries, and maybe a good biography, something with a historical aspect like Washington, Civil War. Sure, I read. Of course, I read. It just rubbed me the wrong way, the way she asked that. So I thought, if you think you're so smart, I will read Proust. I will go onto Amazon and order the book and read it all the way through. And next Christmas, when Patricia and Billy come back to visit, I will discuss Proust with her. So I go online that very night, and it turns out it's more like 6 books. And now they've changed the name to In Search of Lost Time. And I ordered all 6 books. I tried to keep this from Bonnie, but the funny thing is, she never seemed to notice what I was reading because we're so busy with Card Club and Snappy Seniors in the church. She don't really pay much attention. So whenever I have a few minutes, I'm reading Proust. It sure is unusual. He starts with his childhood, and the main thing I got out of that is what a God-forsaken mama's boy he is. The whole first half of the book is about how he is in agony if his mommy doesn't come and kiss him goodnight. It's about how if their neighbor Swan comes over for dinner, that means his mother won't come up and kiss him goodnight in his room. And this goes on for at least 100 pages. I mean, what is wrong with this guy? I like my mama fine, but I was in no way this kind of mama's boy. We did not have that luxury in those days. We had work to do. We got on with it. Now, the fried cornmeal mush wasn't my mama's cooking. That was my grandma's on the farm. My mama was raised on the farm, and it was her burning ambition from, I think, her earliest childhood to get off that farm. She was bound for college. Her daddy was in no way sending her. Why should you spend your money on college for a girl just going to get married and pregnant and never use it? But she was going, and nothing would keep her back. She got a 4-H scholarship to the Teachers College in Terre Haute, and off she went just as you please. I don't think she was ever planning to marry. She was 30 by the time she met my dad. Second World War, Dad was this pleasant, pleasing fella, and he was shipping off, and she kind of thought she'd do him a favor and marry him before he went. She said later, well, she never expected he'd come back. She gave him the nickname Lucky because he was lucky to come back to a wife and son since she was pregnant by the time he left. And he was younger too, only 25. So she called us her two boys. In summers, she'd send me to the farm. I don't think she really wanted to, but her daddy was insistent. She thought it might be good for me spending all my time out of doors because I was thin and maybe a little sickly. I'd spend 6 weeks, July and half of August, under that blazing prairie sun. Now, some people who don't know better think nature is beautiful. Everywhere you go, people who spend all day indoors in front of a TV or at the computer will talk about the wonder and the beauty of nature. People who wouldn't know what nature was if it bit them on the behind, because nature is not beautiful. Nature is a lot of things, but it ain't beautiful. Have you ever seen a calf being born? That raw, bloody picture would send a nature lover into fits. You ever see a dog shake a rabbit to death? How about try washing up in ice cold water, or spend your summer in the furnace of a farmhouse that don't have air conditioning, or watch a fire go out of control and burn a whole barn full of horses. Nature is beautiful. Nature is the enemy of man. That's what you learn on a farm, day one. Proust talks about hawthorn trees. Sure, flowers are nice. They smell good. They fill the air sometimes. Their scent mingling with the cloud of fireflies on a summer night when the air is heavy and still. But nature is something way beyond some flower and trees. I don't mean to say I'm a city boy, which Proust definitely was. No, I dig in my garden, and I love how the cherry tomatoes cluster on the vines like red pearls, but it means killing grubs and pulling weeds, and I think these nature lovers would cry over the poor little weeds, like they can hear them screaming when you pull them out of the ground. Proust bought his tomatoes at the market, or he had his maid get them. And I'm thinking, what incarnation is this book? I have to look up every other word in the dictionary I keep by my side just to read it. It's gibberish. If he has a choice between a good plain word and a $20 word, he picks the $20 word every time. Like he don't want to be understood. So I'm thinking, what's he hiding? Because that's what it is. These intellectuals, they hide behind all their book learned. I respect education. What I don't respect is pretense and hiding and showing off. Words have value. They should be weighed and measured. And the measure of a word is in its honesty. I'm not intimidated by any big fancy word because that is not eloquence. Eloquence is saying what you mean and meaning what you say so that no one misunderstands you and no one can turn your word against you. And it's not your goal to twist the other guy's word neither. It's just plain talking. That's all I ask. My father taught me that. The value of honesty and doing right. That's the thing. There's no value in some high education degrees and fancy words if you don't live right or don't know how to live right. Well, that's all there is in life. I learned that lesson hard. That one time when I disappointed my daddy. It was a hard lesson to disappoint him, to feel his anger. I was 7 years old, and it was a lesson I would never forget. It happened in the fall. First time I came home from the farm. Some boys and I, older boys, were fixing to play a game of touch football. I was by far the youngest, but they let me play because I could run so fast. Or maybe they just wanted to be nice because I wanted so bad to play. So we got together a team in white t-shirts and a team in their gym shirts, and we gathered around, and our leader, Arthur, huddles us around, starts whispering to us and looking over his shoulder to make sure no one hears. And I think he's going to give us our strategy, but he says, "You all know Wallace, right?" There's some nods, and someone spat on the ground. I didn't know him. But Arthur pointed at this kid on the other team, a husky blonde kid, a little fat. He was pretty strong, but he couldn't run fast at all. And Arthur says, "You know he's queer. And we don't like queers. So when he gets the ball, we're going to give it to him, right? We'll give it to him good. I'll make sure he gets the ball." Now, I was 7 years old, and I did not know what queer meant. I just thought from what he said, it was something bad, something you need to be taught a lesson about. So we all agree we're going to give it to Wallace. We all spat and shook on it. So we go in to play. And at first, to give us a chance to just play and enjoy the game, Arthur lets us have a few downs. We score, and it's 7-0. Then Arthur gives us a signal, and we know what to do. Arthur passes the ball right to Wallace, and he catches it. I'll never forget the joy on Wallace's face because he thinks this is the most wonderful thing that has ever happened in his life, that he caught that ball. And his teammates are calling, "Go, Wallace, go!" And he runs around the outside trying to find a break. But there's no break for Wallace because it don't take but a minute for us to come up against him, and we pile on him. And the fists are flying, little hands punching, feet kicking him in the back, handfuls of dirt grabbed, rubbed in his hair, stuffed in his mouth. We're pounding him till his nose is bloody and he's rolling around, trying to just get away if he can, but he can't because we grab him by the waist and pull down his pants. Someone kicks him in the groin. Then he stops struggling and curls up and just lies there like trying to protect his face, curled up like a turtle. That seemed to take the steam out of us a bit. And then the other team's quarterback a big kid, the oldest, named Todd, has his team pulling this all off by then. We're all out of breath. Todd kneels down by Wallace and holds him and helps him up. And Wallace could have been a little boy about it and cried and carried on, but he just holds it in and says, I'm all right, but I got to go. And he just slowly walks away, limping at first, but a little taller with each step. And he never told on us, but Todd did right away. First thing the next morning, we were marched into the coach's office, and he told us he'd called all our fathers and told them we were bullies and delinquents, and we were lucky there were no charges. We were suspended from school for 3 days. When he told us this, I wanted to say, I'm a little kid. I didn't know any better. I was in second grade. I was just going along. But I didn't say anything. But I practiced this speech to tell my father when I got home. My mother picked me up from school that morning, and I said, is Dad going to whoop me? My grandfather whooped me a couple of times, but not my dad. And she said, I don't rightly know. So I was worried all day about it, thinking what I could say to get out of it. But my dad didn't whoop me, not at all. When I tried to tell him my defense, he raised his hand and pulled my ear and said, don't speak, not one word. And then he was just cold. He didn't say another word to me for at least a week. He was just cold. Colder than I had ever seen a human being. Colder than the gleam in Satan's eye, like the poet said. And it was awful, terrifying, because he cut me off like I didn't exist, like I never existed, like he never loved me. Toward the end of this, I got an A on some homework assignment, my first A, and I showed it to him, hoping to get back his approval. He set down the paper like it was nothing and said, son, the only thing that matters is doing right. Just do right in this life. That's all that matters. And I started to cry. And he put his hand on my shoulder, still standing off from me. But it started to break the ice. And I knew then that that's all that matters. Just do right, you see. So I look to do right whenever I can. And I tend to notice when people don't. If I hear a car horn, I turn my head, wondering who done wrong. I turn my head, I look. Because I'm watching. I'm watching for who's doing right in this world and who ain't. And I do my best. I do my best to do right. So about Proust. Proust started writing this big epic in 1909. And it starts with the first volume called Swan's Way. Now, what is so wonderful about this Swan fella? Well, he's a stalker. That's what he is. Stalking and worrying this poor woman, Odette. She's just having fun with him. Maybe she isn't the most innocent of women, but He's a stalker, obsessed with her, like he's mentally unbalanced. That's all I could take away from Swan's Way. This is supposed to be a great love story, Swan's Way? Do people think that? A poor fool stalking what can only charitably be called a party girl, but really is more of like a whore, pardon my language. But this book is crazy. This is great literature. A stalker and a whore. If you want a great love story, take mine. My late wife and I, we are a great all-time love story. The kind of story you never hear these days. Nobody cares about us old-fashioned people who know about love and duty, because I did my duty with her like any upright man would. I did it right. I did my duty. And I loved her like the ocean tide, like the moon and the stars, despite her mother hating me all her days. And this is a story nobody's ever going to put in a book or call great literature. So I didn't know what I was going to do, so I went in the Air Force. I was stationed in Alaska from 1958 to 1962. That sounds like a long way from trouble, but I was only 20 miles from the Russian border. Now, you may laugh at Sarah Palin all you like, but it's no small thing to be stationed 20 miles from Russia in 1962 and during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We spent our days more wide awake than I've ever been since. So I met my first wife, Catherine, after I got out. I was asked to speak at a National Honor Society at my high school to help judge a debate about the military-industrial complex, a phrase that was just coming into our vocabulary. And this girl, this young woman, spoke with such quiet reason and determination. Catherine, she was tall with big shoulders, and she was wearing a black suit. She about did me in. There was a dance that night, and I went, and she was with some guy I didn't know, some guy named Spiro. I lost sight of her for a bit, and then they were playing that song that lifts my feet and makes me feel like I'm floating over everybody. Unchained Melody. And she had broken away by herself, and I asked her to dance. In my memory, she was still wearing that black suit, although she couldn't have been. And I knew I wanted to marry her. Now, her mother was not happy about me hanging around. She did not want her daughter marrying a military man. She said military men are used to being obeyed. She wanted her daughter to have her own mind and her own life. Now, I never rose so far that I had a lot of people obeying me, but that's how she saw it. She had big plans for her daughter, Catherine, who, by the way, was always Catherine, because her mother would never let her be called Kathy or Kate, but it had to be Catherine. Catherine was going to go to Sarah Lawrence College, which was in striking distance of New York City, and she was going to study art and literature and maybe work in some gallery. That was her mother's dream for her. Now, when Catherine answered the telephone, she would always pick it up and say, "Yes." So I had it in my mind that I would call her every morning and blurt out real quick, "Will you marry me?" And she would say, "Yes." And then if she backed out, I could have her for breach of promise. It was a little joke between us. No, her mother did not like me one bit. So I did this every morning for 2 or 3 months. And then one morning, Catherine answers, but she says, "Charlie, we need to talk. I need to see you today down by the gazebo in the park." She sounds real serious. So I say, "Sure." So we sit in the gazebo, and in a stiff, matter-of-fact way, she says, "Charlie, I'm in trouble." She says it looking straight at me, but it's like she doesn't see me. And I let it sink in, and I say, "Well, who's the guy?" And she says, "That doesn't matter, but I'll marry you if you'll still have me." And I say, "How are you in trouble with someone you ain't marrying?" And she says, "I didn't have a lot of choice." And I say, "He forced you?" And she says, "I don't want to say." I'm wondering who it was, but I know sometimes she was seeing Spiro, who was a scrawny little guy like a scarecrow with niblet teeth. But he was strong as a wire and a temper a mile wide. So I feel a lot of confused feelings, and I say, "Well, why have you been saying no to me all these times?" She's looking far away, and she says, "Because it seemed like it was my fate to marry you. I could feel it in my bones, but I didn't want to give in. I didn't want to give in to my fate." And I almost say, "Well, you gave in to him," but I did not say it. But I was angry because she wouldn't accuse him, wouldn't tell me who he was so I could kick his niblet teeth in. And I said, "Look me in the eye. I want you to look me in the eye." And I grabbed her arm, and she pulled away, white as a sheet, saying, "No, that's what he said. He said, 'Look me in the eye.'" And he made me look at him, and I saw those eyes gleaming like a mean dog's. And I knew I didn't have any choice, or he'd break my arm or kill me. All my anger slid away, and I felt ashamed for it. We sat there for a while, not speaking, and I thought, if I marry her now, with her having a baby in a quick 8 months, I will have a mother-in-law who will hate me all my days. All my days. I said to her after a bit, "There are some girls who could find a way to..." She put up her hand and said, "No, I would rather die. I would rather die." I said, "Okay, but what if we're miserable and we do this and in 5 years we split up because it was all too hard or too wrong?" "We'll just have to make it right," she said. I loved her for saying that because I'd been thinking I had to make it right, but it wasn't all up to me. She said, "We'll have to make it right." Then she said, "All I ask is that you take me away from here as soon as you can, just any place else. You pick, but away from here. A city. That might please my mom anyway." So after we were married, I took her up to Indianapolis. It's not New York, but it sure isn't Duggar, Indiana. She had a girl we named George Ann. George after my father and Ann after her mother. And her mother did hate me all her life until she came to her blessed release. And she lived a long, long time. But it does occur to me about the two ways in Proust. In Swann's Way, he talks about these two ways that his family would walk in the evening. I can't pronounce the one that goes by Swann's house. The other is the Guermantes way. The Guermantes being the aristocratic nobility. And it's like the two kinds of life Catherine could have had. The simple way of being a wife and mother, married, canning fruit in the summer, crocheting in the winter, and that other way of New York and art galleries and what they call the glittering society. Those were the two ways before her she could have gone. And fate took her one way, the one towards me, and a simple life. But our daughter now, Georgianne, has had the life her mother wanted for Catherine. So it has come around. She didn't go to Sarah Lawrence. She went to Smith and studied art history. And then she went on to the University of Chicago for a PhD, and now she works at the Art Institute, the big museum in Chicago, in the modern art, the stuff I do not understand. She gets all this from her grandmother. When she was born, some people said, she looks just like you. Got your nose, got your chin. But really, she looks nothing like either one of us. She doesn't look like anyone, with her green eyes and her black hair that she does with purple highlights. She is totally unique. I don't know if our lack of closeness is because she's so different. Maybe it can't be helped. I don't think it's my fault. I tried. And, well, you do your best. Sometimes your best ain't good enough. That's the great pain in life. And you do your best by people. And what can you do? So anyway, I'm reading along in these books of Proust. And this author is making me angry after a while. I was almost with him in book 2. He's on vacation at the seashore and he sees this group of girls he wants to meet. It's another obsession. The swan story is all over and we're with what you'd call the narrator. And he meets these girls and they play games together. And he's in love with one of them, except it's not real love in my book. No, because to him, women are just objects. I see that especially in book 3. It's in book 3 where I'm starting to get really mad because it's all about the Guermantes, the aristocratic family, the other way than Swan's way. And I'm starting to understand this is supposed to be what you call satire. He's just poking fun at all these people in society. He built them all up in his mind, you see. And then when he gets to start dining with them and hanging around with them, he realizes they're just fools. Now, I do not care for satire or sarcasm. It doesn't take any work to make fun of people. It's the lowest form of humor. That's what it is. It's like, I don't like to watch those late night people, Colbert and Fallon and those types, because it's just sarcasm. I liked Johnny Carson. Johnny was one of us. Well, sure, he became rich and had his mansions, but he was one of us. He always was. So he was all right. After he left, I lost interest in those types of shows. They're just about calling everyone idiots if you don't think exactly like they do, if you're not a member of some kind of private club. And of course, anyone who don't think just like they do is some kind of moron. And they base all their humor off of that. That's not for me. So I say, let's bring back Jack Benny, Carson, Burns, and Allen. Those people were funny, and they worked at it. They weren't about hurting people. So Proust just goes along poking his fun, and he describes the Duc de Guermantes with his sort of orangey blonde comb over. And I'm thinking, this guy's number, I got his number. What did Proust do? Huh? What did he ever do? Yes, he wrote these books, but what else did he do? He never got married, never had kids. He never worked a day of his life, never had a job. He just went to dinner parties and teas and talked to people and then made fun of them afterwards. That was all he ever did. What kind of life was that? That's no real life at all. So anyway, it starts to make me mad. This guy never worked a day in his life. Everyone thinks he's some kind of genius. Well, he's no genius to me, and I'm not afraid to say so. And these books just go on and on and on. I'm 75. I'm thinking, am I going to be reading Proust for the rest of my life? I can't be reading this for the rest of my life. But at that point, I'm almost half done. And I believe you finish what you start. And I can't wait till Patricia and Billy arrive for Christmas. And I can tell Patricia how unworthy I think Proust is of his grand reputation. Now I can go toe-to-toe with anyone on the merits of Proust, this superior twit who's just too lazy to live a real life and make an honest living. Then I get into the next 2 volumes, and suddenly it's all the gay stuff. On and on about the gays. And I don't even think it's what you'd call enlightened or politically correct, because he goes on at length about how a gay man is basically a woman. I don't have a lot of experience with gays, but I don't think many would appreciate being called the same as women. No, at least I don't think so. No, but it's all another world to me. But I try to understand. I don't care what people do. It's their business. I'm no judge. God loves all us poor sinners, every one of us. I tried to get this across to my daughter, Georgianne. And it leaves me so much at a loss because somehow in her mind, I said something wrong or did something wrong. I don't know what. But it's come between us now. So I would like to know what I did. But it seems like the least little thing, one wrong word, suddenly, what? The least wrong word. And it's like you've committed some kind of crime. And you don't even know what you did. Georgianne was always different. I knew that early on. Wearing black eyeliner when she was 9 years old. At least she never got into all the piercings. Thank God for that. She did get one tattoo, though. It's on her ankle. A scorpion. You're going to attract boyfriends with a scorpion on your ankle? I was hoping that on prom night, I might get an idea of what kind of boy she'd be interested in. I was looking forward to seeing her in a pretty yellow dress instead of those ripped jeans and that studded leather jacket. But she arranged to be visiting Smith that weekend for a college interview, so the situation never came up. I thought, well, that's ambition, to skip the prom for a college interview. That's good, I suppose. And off she went. Came back for Thanksgiving with a friend named Liza. And I thought Liza would be a good influence because she wore skirts and pearl earrings and had that long hair. By then, Georgianne had shaved half her head with her long black bangs hanging in her eye. I didn't know what to make of that. But you have to let your kids go their own way. I know that. She got good grades, never got into trouble of any kind. That's all that matters. And after her PhD, she got that job at the Art Institute in Chicago. At least she started dressing better. She wore skirts or pantsuits and let her hair grow back, though she does have that purple streak. But she never did seem to have any gentlemen in her life. And I wondered if she'd ever have kids, because she did seem to like kids. She did a lot of babysitting when she was a teenager. Did a great job with them, even the little babies. So I was wondering how she was ever going to have kids. She never dated. Went around with a scorpion on her ankle. And then she went and adopted a baby just like that, a little boy from Ecuador named Moses. He was 6 months old when she got him. Apparently, his parents had died and he was left in an orphanage, and she ended up with him. I was worried wondering, under those circumstances, was he all right? How healthy was he? Because there could be problems. But he was a sweet, quiet baby, just looked on the world with big, adoring eyes. And I was real glad to have a grandson to teach how to build a bonfire, play football. Catherine and I could never have another child after Georgina, so I never did have a son. So I was tickled pink at this. His first birthday came on the same day as the Super Bowl, so we threw a combo party, Super Bowl birthday party. He was only one, so he wouldn't know the difference, or that we were mainly watching the game. Catherine made cornbread, and I made my chili. Our friends came and brought a cake and Jell-O, and everything seemed all right. We opened the baby gifts at halftime, and he made out like a bandit. Everyone wanted to spoil this beautiful little boy with his big black eye and bubbly laugh. So I'm in the kitchen getting a beer, and my friend Nick is in there helping himself to that cornbread. Oh, Catherine made a good hot cornbread with slices of jalapeno in it. Nick didn't see the peppers, so he takes a big bite and chokes on the pepper for a minute. And he takes a swig of beer and says, "Geez, that was hotter than George Ann's wife." And then he laughs. And I look at him puzzled, and he says, "Is she still with that Liza? She is one hot Lizzie. Lizzie Liza." And I realize he's a little drunk. And he sees my face, and he paws me with his clammy hand and says, "Shoot, Charlie, I didn't mean nothing. It's nothing these days, nohow." And he stumbles back into the family room, chuckling to himself and repeating his cute little phrase, feeling like he's a comedian. I'm alone in the kitchen, and I drink my beer, and I'm thinking it over, and it all makes sense, of course. I don't know if I always suspected it or if I just kind of put it out of my mind, but it's not like I needed to know, but we were never very close. And I wanted her to know it was okay and I could accept it. Maybe we could be closer. So I'm in the kitchen alone thinking this over when George Ann comes in to throw away some of the paper plates, and she gathers up the garbage bag, pulling it up out of the can. And I say, "You don't have to do that, honey. Taking the garbage out is a man's job." And I only meant it kind of like she shouldn't have to risk getting dirty or hoisting this heavy bag. But she rolls her eyes and says, "No comment." That's her phrase. I never did like it. It always sounds like she thinks I'm not smart enough to argue with. But I want to get past it. I want to get closer to her. So I take the garbage bag from her, and I tie the ends, and we're standing there, and I say, "You know, you can tell me if you're, one of those." She looks confused for a second, then her eyes narrow, and in a furious tone she says, "That you said one of those is precisely why we will never talk about it." And she stomps off into the family room and leaves me standing there holding this bag of garbage. And what can you do? How can you do anything right? Here I am, trying to be close to her, trying to accept her just as she is. And what happens? I somehow say one wrong word or something. I don't even know what I did. Like I was tried and convicted, and I don't even know the charges. And that was it. Any chance we had seemed gone. She was more distant than ever after that. And it wasn't long after that Catherine got sick, and I had to take care of her. And I never did have much chance to play with Moses. And I never did teach him football. So Catherine got sick, and I retired from the insurance company. Georgianne helped when she could, but I mostly took care of her on my own for a long while. She got dementia knew me less and less. I kept her out of the hospital as long as I could, but finally she went into a home and she stopped talking, laid down and died just 2 months after I admitted her. It felt like admitting her was what did her in. She stopped eating and all. And I had to decide whether to have him put in a feeding tube. That was a hard decision. But inside, she was gone by then. She was gone. I met Bonnie a few years later, and we hit it off right away. She would help out at the church, and I would drive the van for the old folks. I was already over 70, but still, we call them the old folks because Bonnie and I still have no problem with what you would call mobility. We're almost as active as ever, though sometimes my knee bothers me. And she has little ailments, but we're mostly about as good as you can expect. We have a good time with snappy seniors, and card club is really more my thing with a few guys playing euchre twice a month. I bake cookies for that, chocolate chip. Since Bonnie can't have chocolate because of her caffeine, maybe bladder issue, I always tease her, hey, I got some nice chocolate chunk cookies here. Oh, you can't have one. We tease each other. That's how we flirt. We were like kids when we first started dating. I was actually nervous the first time we met up at the Olive Garden. She was so easy and sweet and kind, and she had her one son, and I had Georgianne. Billy and Patricia never had kids. So Bonnie was tickled I had a grandson she could spoil. By then, Moses was a tween and sprouting up real tall, which surprised all of us. So we were together a few years by the time I started reading all this Proust. And it's like I was being lulled into some kind of hypnotic state as I read these long sentences. I'd fall asleep, and Swann is watching Odette play the piano, and the Duchess is pouring tea and insulting her rivals, and the Baron de Charlus is gaying it up all over the place with his powdered face. And then things split, and I'm seeing double, and it's like things are in twos, like with Swann and Odette and Marcel and Lamartine, and there's gay and there's straight, and there's Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards and Jews and non-Jews and Swann's way and the Guermantes way. And in my dreams, there's these two of everything. There's two ways. But in my life, there's one way. There's straight down the narrow path. I had to look up this whole Dreyfus affair to understand it. And I think that was a whole lot more frightening than Proust understood. The kernel of the story is a Jewish soldier named Dreyfus was accused of passing secrets to the Germans, and he went to prison for it. But it came to light there was a cover-up, and everyone in France, in French society, was torn because in one side you said you have to support the military no matter what, and Dreyfus wasn't important. Besides, he was Jewish, which they felt probably meant he wasn't loyal to France. And the other side said this was a miscarriage of justice. He was an innocent man. And this tore society in half. Now, I don't care about politicians. In my book, they're mostly all crooked. But the military is something else. I served, I know. The whole edifice of the military is built on trust. You put your faith in your brothers at arms. You trust the command to know what they're doing, all up and down the line. That trust, that's at the heart of everything. And it's essential. That's why this Dreyfus affair is so frightening to me. The command was rotten, and they could not be trusted. If I'd have been around then, I might have been torn in two myself. The breakdown of trust, that's real frightening. You can ignore politics and keep to your path, but there has to be something you can trust. There has to be something. So I started having these dreams. The night I finished Proust, Bonnie was out of town. She never had much family, but some long-lost cousin found her doing ancestry research, so they became friends. They are so much alike, they even look alike. So Bonnie had driven up to Kokomo to be with her new cousin, and I was reading along trying to get through this last book because, like I said, I'm 75, and I'll be damned if I'm going to spend the rest of my days reading Proust. Then the phone rang. It was late, but Bonnie and I are late-night people, so I knew it was her. It was around midnight, and I can hear laughter over the phone, and she says, "How did you ever end up with an arrest record? What are you hiding from me?" And she laughs because she figures this is a good story. She and her cousin were having fun looking up our records, you see, and found me out. Yes, I had a record. It wasn't so funny to me, and I don't know what to say, but I told her we'd talk about it later. But the truth was, I didn't want to tell her about it. It was just an unpleasant situation. It involved that secret I'd kept all my life from my family, from George Ann, from Catherine's mother. So I had to figure out what to tell Bonnie. Eventually, I made up a story about drinking too much and getting into a fight when I was distraught over Catherine getting into a fight, which was close enough to the truth anyway. Soon after I admitted Catherine to the home, our class had their 50th reunion. I felt like I deserved a break. It would be a chance to reconnect with old ties, reminisce a little. It was in the fall, beautiful damp weekend. You could smell the burning leaves and the sky was a soft, misty gray. So somebody got it in their head to suggest we all head out to the field, play some tag football. Enough of us were healthy enough to play, so we all said sure. There was beer and barbecue, and we wore T-shirts versus sweaters. And on the other team was a guy I didn't expect to see, Spiro, the guy who had forced my Catherine and got her pregnant. I hadn't seen him in almost 50 years. He's still as skinny as a wire, and when he saw me, he grinned with those yellow niblet teeth. I was just going to ignore him. We'd play a few downs, and at one point, he has the ball, and I tag him, but it's damp out and the ground is soft, so we slip, and I kind of fall into him. We fall hard, so we're dazed. He rolls onto me, and he's mad. He thinks I've tackled him on purpose. His breath stinks, and he leans in close. And even though he's mad, he has this queer smile on his face, and he says, "You don't got to punish me, Charlie. You got what you wanted, didn't you? You got everything because of me. You got that lovely lady and your daughter. You got everything you wanted because of me. Without me, you wouldn't have had none of it." And he commences to laughing, a dry rasp of a laugh like the wind blowing through the corn. And something comes over me, a fury I never saw coming, I never felt before, and it's all so quick. I just grab him and start punching his face as hard as I can. He's still laughing, or I think he is. And I'm smashing my fist into his nose and mouth and eye and clouding his jughead ears. If beating up Wallace that day when I was a kid was all wrong, well, this felt so right. It was only a minute, and then folks grabbed me and dragged me off. He was bleeding pretty good, and I chipped one of his niblet teeth. People are trying to calm me down, but I am calm. So calm. Frighteningly calm. And we're just standing there. And one of us players was the local sheriff. And Spiro immediately says, he's pressing charges. They try to talk him out of it. But I spent a night in jail, pay a $500 fine, and then it was over. I put it all out of my mind. Then, that night I finished Proust, Bonnie called, and it all come back to me. I hang up, read the last few pages, lay the book on my chest, and I start crying. And it's coming back to me. I didn't know why I walloped Spiro, but it come to me. He was right. I got what I wanted. I got everything. And I got it all because of what he did to her, to Catherine. And Catherine had other plans. She was going to go to college and go the Guermantes way. Instead, she married me and went my way. And what I didn't know was whether she was just as happy. Was she happy? Was she ever happy with how her life turned out? And I couldn't ask her. The day I beat up Spiro, she was in a home not knowing me anymore. And it was too late to ever ask her about it, to ask if she was happy. And I could never know. I did right. I did right by her. Didn't I? And when you do right, isn't happiness the reward? Is it enough to do right? Was it right for her? When Bonnie called, Catherine had been gone for years. So I could never ask her. I never know. I cried alone there in bed, and the book was open on my chest, and I wanted to feel something close to me, something holding me. And the book was holding me as I cried. And I finally started to doze off. And I started to dream. And there was Proust in his dove gray suit. And we were standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean, the sea below us, glinting gold in the sun. And I turned my head to him and he looked at me, his face like a black and white photo. And he put his hand on my shoulder. I was all in knots, but when he touched me, something rose in me. The pain traveled from my calves, through my chest, floated to my shoulders, and oozed down my arms, through my fingertips. My hands floated up in front of me, and all the pain oozed out of me. I picked up my feet and leaned forward, and there I was, hovering in the air with Proust. And I gently flew over the field of deep blue water, and the sun melted into the deep blue of the stars surrounding us like 1,000 hands cupping my heart. And floating there in the void, a thought entered my head, like the scent of lilies. And the thought was, you don't have to be right. You don't always have to do right. You don't even know the beginning. It's not supposed to be a test or a trial or a trap. If it don't make you free, it don't matter. These are rules you didn't make. These are judgments that only belong to God. You don't know a thing you never did. You don't have to know. Just let go of it all. It was never real. Only this is real. This real thing. I can't quite say what it was, just this floating in a void. Even the stars faded, and everything was black and at peace. I fell asleep into blackness, and I was free. I was alone all the next day. Bonnie was still with her cousin, and it came over me in waves all day. I'd feel at peace, then a moment of fear, and then doubt, and then I'd shed a tear, and then the dream would come back, and I'd feel quiet again, until the quiet won out. I wanted to tell people you don't need to worry to be right all the time. You don't have to worry all the time till you're tied up in knots. You can be free. You can find peace. But I couldn't tell them I knew this because I dreamt that Marcel Proust put his hand on my shoulder. So I kept it to myself. And I don't know if any of it makes any sense. So that's why I wrote it all down. I'm writing it all down to Georgianne, and she can read it after I'm gone and make any sense of it she can. And so I finally finished all of Proust. By the end, you're wondering what the point of all this was, and he tells you. It leads up to him deciding to write this book, to capture time, to capture something of the essence of life, of time itself. And I got to that part, and it's eloquent and passionate. This was his mission, the purpose of his life's work. And I got to that, and I wondered, well, did he do it? Did he really capture time and achieve this big goal, especially after the captive and several hundred pages of obsessing over whether his girlfriend is a lesbian? I didn't think so. No, I didn't think this was the book he set out to write, because he never lived life, you see. Like I said before, what if he'd lived a full life, got married, had kids, held down a job 40 hours a week, and planted tomatoes, fixed a leaky faucet, kissed a skinned knee? But I thought maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I didn't get. There was nothing for me to do but to start reading it over from the beginning, to see what he did with all that ambition. Now that I understood where he was going with it, I had 2 weeks until Billy and Patricia were coming to visit again. So I started it over with Swan's Way. It goes a lot faster the second time. And I find myself reading some sentences over 2 or 3 times, slowly, just for the pleasure of it. And then I think, wait, this is all wrong. This is all wrong, huh? Oh, Bonnie had been after me for a while to take some class at the extension, something we could take together. So I said to her, Bonnie, we're signing up for French class. She says, French? Are you sure you want to study French? Well, I know I'm not going to be able to ever read Proust in French, but I can have both copies of the book in front of me, and maybe I can get the flavor of it. So we start in February. Anyway, Billy and Patricia come shortly after Christmas. Billy needs to buy a suit for a wedding they're going to, and Bonnie wants to buy it for him for Christmas. And I say, you two go and shop for the suit. I want to have some time with Patricia. Everyone's a little surprised, especially Patricia. But I say, I have a surprise for her. So they go off, and Patricia has a cup of coffee at the table. And I go to the fridge and I take out a cold pan of cornmeal mush, and I commence to slice it off and fry it in some oil. I tell her I'm making fried cornmeal mush, my Madeleine. Remember about the Madeleine? She don't remember, so I have to remind her. But then it comes back to her. I make the plate of fried cornmeal mush. Now by then, I'm itching to discuss Proust. I've had no one to talk about this with. I can't tell my friends at Card Club or Snappy Seniors I've read all 6 volumes of Proust, but I'm itching to talk about this, maybe find out what I missed, get an opinion on whether Proust achieved his goal to capture time. So I tell Patricia, I've read all of Proust, and so on, and then I wait to hear her opinion of Proust, and she giggles and scratches her head, and she says, well, I've only really read Swan's Way. Only read Swan's Way? The first volume? What did she mean she only read Swan's Way? Why would anyone do that? And miss the whole story? Not know how Swan fades away and dies? And never find out that awful bourgeois Madame Verdurin becomes the Princess of Guermantes? What does she mean? She only read Swan's Way. You could have knocked me over with a feather. It's like leaving the World Series game after the first inning. It's like leaving the Super Bowl before halftime. And I'm thinking, where I come from, you finish what you start. You don't start a big project and leave it less than halfway. You finish what you start, or what's the use? And now, who am I going to talk about Proust with? That's the disappointment. I got no one to talk about all this with, all the ideas and drama and ambitions. So I swallow my mush and I just say, oh, that's too bad. And she doesn't even look embarrassed. Then it occurs to me, maybe Georgianne, maybe she would read all of Proust and talk it over with me. I call her that very night. I find myself explaining the whole situation to her, and she laughs and says, okay, Dad, I'll read all of Proust for you. We'll have ourselves a little book club. I felt like we were really close at that moment. Meanwhile, Patricia and I are eating our mush. And maybe she is getting a little embarrassed. She says, so tell me about your fried cornmeal mush. What does it evoke for you? Evoke. I know she doesn't want the story of my life, so I don't really answer. I ask her, how do you like the mush? And she says, oh, it was good. It's really polenta, isn't it? Well, you can call it polenta if you like, but that's just a fancy way of saying cornmeal mush. Like a Madeleine is a fancy word for a cookie. And I always did like my sweets. And that's my story. Thanks for tuning in if you're still watching. And I'm going to click end. Click end. That's the mute. Mute. That's the video. No. End. Oh, end.